So Mike over at the Metal Mickey channel has started a thread video prompting those of us in the metal community here on YouTube to come up with 5 well-praised metal albums from a genre's heyday, and then talk about why we don't like them. So in this video, I'm going for thrash metal albums that I just don't think measure up to the hype. In other words, we're gonna have some fun. You like fun, right? So as metalheads, we likely know a fan who praises all albums from a given metal genre and era, going through their musical choices with blinkers on, as Mike calls them. Of course, for those of us on the other side of the Atlantic, the term blinkers might not be all that familiar. Here in North America, we call them blinders, and they're basically what horses wear so they'll stay focused on where they're going and not be distracted by anything else. And it's an apt metaphor for the folks who don't seem to have any real discernment, or maybe they mindlessly praise all records of a certain style and time period. In short, they go the predictable path and follow popular opinion. And well, Mike's just not having that. And you know what, I get it, because I too prefer to own my choices instead of letting others dictate them to me. So I'm picking 5 thrash metal albums between 1986 and 1988, a revered era for the genre, and tell you why I've never really warmed up to them, despite how others might feel about them. And yes, this is where the usual disclaimer comes in, which is that my views on these albums is just that, mine. Conversely, they might not be yours. And since we're all big boys and girls here, we should already know the difference between opinion and fact, and not get our panties in a bunch when someone disagrees with our personal tastes. Trust me, you'll be fine. Anyways, with that, let's talk about some albums. First up is the debut studio album from German thrash metal band Exumer. This is Possessed by Fire, released in 1986 by Disaster Records. Now, I'm definitely a fan of early German thrash as much as the next guy, and even Creator didn't start out as excellent musicians. Both Endless Pain and Pleasure to Kill have some pretty off-time drums and guitars, among other issues. However, when compared to what came out of Germany at the time, this album seems a bit substandard. I mean, the vocals are particularly weak at best and unintentionally funny at worst. Admittedly, there are some occasionally good ideas on this record, musically speaking, but the execution is sorely lacking. In addition to the somewhat cringy vocal patterns, the lyrics are downright dumb, the guitars are noticeably sloppy, riffs are stale and repetitive, and the drum work is predictable and basic, and often sloppy as well. There's some early Slayer and early Exodus borrowing here and there, but not done anywhere near as well. And then there are moments of pure goofing around, which I've never really liked in my thrash. Believe it or not, I'd never given anything after this album a chance from these guys, so I can't say if they improved since this fledgling effort. My guess is that they did at some point, which might be why this album is given the attention it gets. Let me know in the comments if they got better, or didn't get better. So, not awful, but not really compelling either. It just sort of is. Next is the debut studio album from American thrash metal band Astrophy. This is Socialized Hate, released in 1988 by Roadrunner Records. So in contrast to the Exumer record, Astrophy are actually a tight and riff-heavy band. Unfortunately, it just doesn't equate to great songs for me. One of the standard thrash fallbacks in the 1980s, one that never appealed to me, is the combination of a typical basic thrash beat with rigidly delivered vocal phrasing, usually found in every single song of some of the genre's most mediocre and moronic albums. It resulted in a whole lot of sameness in 80s thrash, and Astrophy really does suffer from that malady on this first album. Admittedly, there are some decent change-ups with the beats, but the record overwhelmingly stays in that same old generic thrash beat we've all heard a million times. And it probably doesn't help that the drums have such an overall flat and lifeless production either. One saving grace, I suppose, is that they kept the whole jokey metal thing to a minimum with the track Beer Bong, which is far stupider than I remember it being. Of course, there had been a number of stupid jokey songs in 80s and early 90s thrash, so they're in good, albeit cringy company. So yeah, more dumb lyrics. Out of the 5 albums I'm talking about here, this is the only one I have on vinyl. In fact, it's somewhere back there. And my guess is that I got it free through my college radio connections. I don't know. Maybe I'll sell it off one day. It seems like more than a few people out there will pay quite a bit for it, which still boggles my mind. Anyways, yeah, this one really bores me for the most part. Next up is the third studio album from German thrash metal band Tankard. This is The Morning After, released in 1988 by Noise Records. So I'm going to start off pretty harsh here. I mean, Tankard does not deserve to be included in any big whatever of Teutonic thrash grouping whatsoever. Merely by being contemporaries of the other three bands and being from Germany shouldn't count. I only recognize a big three, and that's that. But anyways, as I said, or at least implied before that, I'm not a fan of jokey metal for the most part. That pretty much applies the entire Tankard catalog for me. Also, never really been a fan of the one-trick pony that is the whole let's sing about beer all the time thing. That's boring to me on a whole different level. Of the 80s albums, this one probably represents best what I dislike about Tankard in general, but merely puts it all in one place. These tracks somehow manage to be both fast and boring, and that's quite a feat. Once more, an over-reliance on stock thrash beats, lack of vocal pattern variants, and dumb lyrical topics. There is some attempt at riff change-ups from track to track, but it soon enough falls into the same old, and we're back to boring. So once again, I just don't get the appeal of this band at all, and never have. I tried to get into them during the first two albums, both of which taped off a friend, but it just never took. This album in particular is boring, predictable, occasionally irritating, and certainly goofy, and I've yet to hear anything from them to change my mind. I might give a small exception to their cover of the Gangrene song Alcohol, which is fairly inspiring, but it's not even their song, so I don't know if it counts. But yeah, past that, nothing. Next is the debut EP from UK thrash metal band Acid Rain. This is Moshkinstein, released in 1988 by Under One Flag. So I should admit straight out the gate that, by and large, I haven't been the most enthusiastic UK thrash fan of the classic era. I've heard modern thrash from the Brits that is actually enjoyable and occasionally really great, but if we're talking about the 1980s, some of it was serviceable, a little of it was enjoyable, but not much of it was really my bag. So straight away, the vocals here are beyond weak in terms of predictable delivery and a total lack of punch. Playing is insanely sloppy, the mix is awful, and the guitar tone is actually irritating. If I were to judge this as more of a punk album, some of this could be excused, I suppose. But if it's considered thrash metal, then it gets judged by those standards. Also, I hate the cover. Really hate the cover. In fact, I hate all of their album covers, so toss that in as well. A lot of opinions and general reviews of this EP that I've read often seem rather desperate to validate it, with sentences that start with clearly defensive qualifiers like, although not the most unique band, or it's not really that bad. It's almost as if they feel otherwise, but just aren't saying it. I will concede that since this is a first release, things might have improved on future albums. Speaking of which, the 2019 release of the Age of Entitlement LP was actually pretty good, though also a largely different lineup and after a 19-year hiatus, so there's that. Anyways, it's okay as a punk album, it just doesn't hold up as a thrash record, whether or not it was meant to be that. Funny enough, it wasn't the jokey bits that put me off, which was somehow delivered in an admittedly non-cringy way. I just don't think this is a great or even good thrash release. So there you go. Next up is the second studio album from Canadian then thrash metal band Voivod. This is Roar, released in 1986 by Combat Records. So this one might be a bit of a surprise. I mean, this album sits squarely in the classic and revered era of Voivod. And while I love the albums on either side of this one, such being War and Pain and Killing Technology, Roar has always been a sticking point with me. I mean, somehow Roar avoids both the punch and all-out assault of its predecessor and the great songwriting of its follow-up record. It's like an unremarkable middle child between two advanced siblings. I mean, it's not awful, but it just doesn't get noticed as much, likely for some valid reasons. One thing I can complain about here, though, is the musicianship. Everyone is tight in the performance, and the change-ups keep the tracks moving along, but the production is noticeably flat, and Snake's vocal delivery has no real impact this time around. It feels like it should be a great record, but it just isn't. So this one suffers the most from being comparatively lackluster, even if all of the other components are well in place. Perhaps the saddest fact of all is that the very name of this album really doesn't deliver on the promise. I mean, I'd still listen to it if someone put it on because it's not a total loss, and I might buy it one day just to be a completist. It's just not a high point in their career for me. Of course, some folks don't see the dip in quality and consider it part of a great run of Voivod albums. They're welcome to their opinion, of course. I just don't happen to entirely agree. So I definitely want to thank Mike over at the Metal Mickey YouTube channel for starting this thread. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend shooting over to Mike's channel and checking out his videos. Maybe even subscribe to his channel. Quite a few of his videos cover classic metal from the 1980s and the 1990s, along with some collection updates and collaboration with other members of the Metal VC right here on the platform. It's also a pretty straight shooter when it comes to needlessly taboo subjects, such as the very thread I just responded to. And I gotta agree with Mike, we should be talking about these things. And I'm hoping this thread does just that. I'll leave a link in the description of my video to his video so you can join in on the discussion, but make a video too. Why not? Of course, while you're busy clicking away, maybe check out some more of the videos here at the Accusation Network, where each and every week I cover the subject of metal vinyl collecting, but I also do classic and modern metal in general. If you like the sound of that, definitely like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and share my videos with some of your friends. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.